welcome again. Welcome to the next lecture of suppositories. My name is Anjali Mishra and I am an assistant professor at Noida Institute of Engineering and Technology, Pharmacy Institute, Greater Noida. So, in the last lecture we saw introduction to suppositories, advantages, disadvantages and what are the ideal properties of suppositories, different sizes, shapes of suppositories. Here we are going to understand what are the basis of suppositories, how it is made, how it is incorporated into a proper suppositories. So, because last lecture I just said ki what is a base. In the base you can make your suppository because base forms a major chunk of the suppositories. So, let us have a quick discussion on it. So, types of bases. Types of bases. So, before moving on to the types of bases, let us have a revision on what are bases. Bases are nothing but they are the substances which are incorporated or in which the medicaments are incorporated in order to make a suppository. So, bases forms a major chunk part of the suppository. Then bases should have firmness, solidity, rigidness which can hold and which can encapsulate the medicament which has been incorporated into the suppositories. So, base is nothing but it is a really in fact it is in the real sense it is nothing but the base only which is going to hold our suppositories in a proper firmness or in a rigid way. Moving ahead, let us understand the types of bases that are usually used in the making of suppositories. So, bases are majorly classified firstly into oily base, then water soluble or water miscible base, and third one is the emulsifying or the synthetic base. Then oily bases are nothing but your oleogenous bases and hydrophobic bases which are incorporated into making of medication whenever we are having a medication that are not water miscible. So, we often go for bases that are oily or oleogenous in nature. Then here we have water soluble or water miscible bases. These kind of bases are also known as hydrophilic bases because they are definitely water loving. So, they are known as hydrophilic bases. Hydrophilic bases are often incorporated when the medicaments are hydrophilic in nature or when we want a major target organ is such where the fluid content is more because we want the easy melting and transportation of a suppository. So, definitely water soluble or miscible bases are oftenly incorporated or used when we have an hydrophilic or when we have a water loving drug, water loving excipient or the target organ has a huge water content. Then moving on towards the third type of base, synthetic or emulsifying bases. Whenever there is a mixture of medicaments, it is if it is not even your oily base loving or not even your hydrophilic loving, then definitely we go for this emulsifying or synthetic base. Emulsifying and synthetic base can also be used when the medicaments are of both the nature or they are amphiphile in nature or they have both the or when we have more than two bases, then in such cases we can even go for emulsifying or synthetic bases. So, here we saw three important types of bases, that is oily bases, water soluble or water miscible bases which is oftenly also called as hydrophilic bases, and the third type of base was nothing but your emulsifying or synthetic bases. Moving ahead, first let us discuss your oily bases or oleogenous bases. As I discussed, they are oftenly used when our medication or medicament is oil soluble or they have poor aqueous solubility or they have poor aqueous affinity. So, I can say that oleogenous drug have poor aqueous affinity, So, they are oftenly used when our drug is not at all soluble in water. So, in such cases we are oftenly going for oleogenous bases. So, in oleogenous bases also we have got three different varieties of that bases. First is nothing but your coca butter or the theobroma oil. Second is the emulsified coca butter and the third one is the hydrogenated oil. These three types are an important variety of oleogenous bases or oily bases. So, depending upon the type of medication, the nature of the medicament, the type may vary. So, our choice of using bases or choosing the bases may differ from type of medications we are using or the storage conditions, because the storage condition of theobroma oil might not be similar with the storage condition of hydrogenated oil. So, things may vary. So, depending upon the choice of using depending upon the area of using, depending upon the storage conditions, our use and selection of bases might vary from medication to medication. So, these are three important varieties of oily bases. Moving ahead, so let us have a deep study on the type of oleaginous bases. In that, the first type was your cocoa butter or the theobroma oil. So, cocoa butter is nothing but it is the butter that is we obtain from the plant of the coca tree, So, as we can see here, these yellow fruits are present. So, whenever these fruits ripe, a sort of waxy material is obtained from these fruits, which are nothing but your cocoa butter. So, cocoa butter is nothing but it is obtained from the roasted seeds of Theobroma cocoa. So, whenever these seeds are roasted by various processes, the sort of material or the butter that we obtain are nothing or known as the cocoa butter. It is also known as Theobroma oil. Then at room temperature, this butter is nothing but it is yellowish in color, which is having a faint agreeable taste or odor like chocolate, because this plant is majorly made for cocoa production. As a result, the cocoa butter has got a taste of chocolate like odor or chocolate like taste, which is yellowish color in which is yellowish white in color at solid room temperature. It is very important that it is solid at room temperature. Moving ahead, it is a triglyceride. Definitely it is an oleaginous base, so it is a triglyceride. Now, here comes the most important point, that it melts at 30 to 35 degrees Celsius. As I have just now mentioned that cocoa butter is usually solid at room temperature. It is solid at room temperature, and as we have discussed earlier that our medication or the suppository that we make, it is responsible to being solid at room temperature. If it is not solid at room temperature, if it melts at room temperature, it becomes very difficult for a physician or a medical practitioner to insert that medication into a person's cavity. Because if it is not solid, if it is not firm, the administration is of major concern to that particular patient. As a result, the administration becomes very difficult. Now, here the cocoa butter melts at 30 to 35 degrees Celsius. So, melting of cocoa butter at 30 to 35 degrees Celsius is of prime importance, because we want the melting of the suppository at 37.5 degrees Celsius, because that is the temperature of our body. If the medication do not melt at this temperature, then what is the major issue? The medication might melt earlier or it might melt late. So, this issue is actually a this is actually a problem. So, here that problem is minimized by using cocoa butter. So, this cocoa butter is of prime importance for use. Traditionally also, the major base of suppository was always chosen to be cocoa butter only, because it was readily available. The manufacturing cost was also very cheap. It can be easily extracted from the roasted seeds of cocoa butter, and later on as the melting point is very much close to the human body temperature, that is 30 to 35 degrees Celsius. So, the melting is also not a hindrance while we are making suppository using cocoa butter. Moving on to the next slide. Whenever we are using cocoa butter as a base of the suppository, let us understand what are the advantages or the disadvantages we have to come across while making or while using cocoa butter as a suppository. Let us understand the first advantages. It just melts below the body temperature. So, definitely that is a boon for us. If we are making suppository using cocoa butter, melting of suppositories actually plays a very important role. If the suppositories do not melt, or if they melt with before insertion into the body cavity, that is also an issue. However, while insertion also, if they do not melt or if their melting point is higher than the body temperature, the heating or all those process becomes really very difficult. However, such case is not there when we are making suppository using cocoa butter, because the range or the melting range of this cocoa butter is somewhere close around 37.5 degrees Celsius. So, melting is definitely not a hindrance while using cocoa butter. Let us move on towards the next advantage. It maintains its solidity at room temperature. Definitely, as we know that if the room temperature is somewhere around 25 to 30 degrees Celsius, our cocoa butter is not going to melt, it is going to remain firm, it is going to remain solid at room temperature. So, in such cases usually the temperature is around 30 to 35 degrees Celsius only, or or somewhere around 25 degrees Celsius, because room temperature is oftenly considered to be as 25 degrees Celsius. So, somewhere around this temperature our cocoa butter is not going to melt, it is going to remain its rigid, it is going to remain its integrity, and it is going to be firm at that temperature. So, melting or it's maintain its integrity at room temperature is of prime boon for us. It does not causes clumsiness, or it does not causes uneasiness while insertion as well. Moving on towards the third advantage, that it readily liquefy and solidify on heating and cooling respectively. So, easily heating of cocoa butter is never an hindrance, and easy cooling of cocoa butter is also not an hindrance while making suppository using cocoa butter. So, whenever heating and cooling is never an hindrance while making cocoa butter, the use becomes more economical as it is easily available. It can be easily extracted from the roasted seeds of cocoa butter. So, definitely it is never a major question, or it is never an hindrance. So, these are some of the advantages. As I discussed in the previous lecture as well, that each coin has got its two sides. So, when we studied about the advantages, it becomes important to study the disadvantages as well. So, very first disadvantages of suppository is that it stick to mold. Mold is nothing but it is the substance into which suppositories are oftenly made or encapsulated. So, whenever our suppositories are made into by encasing it into a particular mold, sticking often takes place, and sticking is a particular no in this situation, because if sticking will takes place, the medication might always stick to the bottom of the mold, or sometimes what may happen is the unpleasant appearance of the suppository may cause, and as we are very much aware that unpleasant appearance is completely not acceptable by the patients. They often keep themselves away if the medication don't look good, or if they do not have a good aesthetic appeal to the medication. So, in such cases sticking of mold is completely unavoidable if we are using cocoa butter, because cocoa butter sometimes what happen is it completely stick to the mold, and while removal of the suppository from the mold, it is actually a very hindrance to remove the cocoa butter suppository from it very carefully. Moving on towards the second disadvantage is leakage from body cavity. Leakage, as we have seen that leakage is a prime concern when we are using suppositories as a medicated dosage form, because whenever we are using suppositories, they are definitely going to melt at body temperature, and at body temperature whenever they are melting, they are definitely getting converted into liquid dosage form, and if anything that is being inserted into a particular cavity, and that cavity is nothing but an orifice, that liquid is definitely going to ooze out from that surface. So, leakage, because as we know that cocoa butter suppositories are going to melt at 37.5 degrees Celsius. So, at this temperature it is definitely going to ooze out from that particular organ from where it was inserted. So, leakage is definitely a prime concern when we are using cocoa butter suppositories. Then eventually it is an expensive process. Definitely cocoa butter plant or the tree is not available everywhere, so roasting requires effort, it requires skill. So, definitely it is a expensive process. Now, clubbing the advantages and disadvantages of suppositories, let us have a quick recap of what we have studied. Advantages, definitely it melts below the body temperature, so it is very useful for us. Then at below body temperature, it maintains its solidity and integrity, which is a very important thing when we are making suppositories, because storage condition is of prime concern for us. Later on, cocoa butter suppository have the advantages that it can be readily liquefied or solidified on heating and cooling respectively. So, it becomes various important thing while making suppository using cocoa butter. Then understanding the disadvantages, that it stick to mold, it has leakage from body cavity, and eventually it is expensive. So, this is all about the advantage and disadvantages of suppositories. Moving on towards the next class of suppository known as the emulsified cocoa butter. As we have seen the previous slide that there are types of oleogenous bases, that is cocoa butter, emulsified cocoa butter and theobroma oil. We just now had a quick view of what is cocoa butter. Now we are understanding what is the emulsified cocoa butter. It may be used as a base when large quantity of aqueous solution are to be incorporated. So, it is of very importance when we are making anything on a larger scale, on an industrial scale, then use of emulsified cocoa butter are always preferred instead of cocoa butter only, because as we have just now seen that cocoa butter is quite expensive and it requires sophisticated treatment, it requires high skills. So, in such cases when we want to make anything on a larger scale, so we do not go for cocoa butter, instead we go for emulsified cocoa butter. So, in order to make emulsified cocoa butter, this is the formula that we require, that is 5% glyceryl monostearate is something we require, and in addition to this 4% beeswax is also that we required. In addition to these two things, another thing that we require is 10% laneth wax. When we club these three, what we get is nothing but the emulsified theobroma oil. And as I just now discussed, that emulsified theobroma oil is used when we want the suppository production on a larger scale, when we want an economical production. So, definitely in such cases what we do is we often go for emulsified theobroma oil rather than going for cocoa butter. So, moving on ahead, hydrogenated oils. As we have just now seen, there are three classes of oleogenous cocoa butter. Then oleogenous bases, the first class is nothing but your cocoa butter. The second class is nothing but your emulsified cocoa butter. Then the third class is nothing but your hydrogenated oils. Now, let us understand what are hydrogenated oils. Hydrogenated oils is often used as a substitute to theobroma oil. So, here are some of the examples of hydrogenated oils. Then they can be hydrogenated edible oil, it can be coconut oil, it can be pea oil, it can be stearic acid, or it can be palm kernel oil. So, hydrogenated oil is any of the oil that are actually oleogenous in nature and they are extracted from any of the things here mentioned like pea oil, it can be from palm kernel oil, or it can be from any of the sort of coconut oil. Moving ahead. In the previous slides, we had a quick view of what are the bases, types of oleogenous bases. Here, we are going to understand, we are going to study the types of bases of water soluble or water miscible bases. If you all can recall, the name that I have given to this basis was nothing but hydrophilic bases. Hydrophilic base was the name that is also being called to water soluble bases or water miscible bases. Now, there are three important classes of hydrophilic bases. They are glycerogelatin base, polyethylene glycol, and soap glycerine base. So, these are some of the three important classes of water soluble bases. So, let us have a deep introduction to each of these three bases. First, we are going to start with glycerogelatin base. Just a quick recap that glycerogelatin base is a sort of water miscible base or hydrophilic base. So, glycerogelatin base is nothing but it is a mixture of glycerine, it is water, and it is made stiff by using gelatin. So, if I talk about glycerogelatin base, it contains glycerine, it contains water, then it contains gelatin. When we are mixing actually glycerine and water, what we get is a mixture which is quite soft in nature. But what we want for suppository is some bases that is actually rigid, is hard. In such cases, we add gelatin to it in order to have certain kind of firmness, integrity, solidity. As a result, glycerogelatin base is a fusion or mixture of these three important substances. It is colorless, transparent, and translucent in nature. Then it is very much soft to touch. So, it has a very soft agreeable taste, it has a soft agreeable touch, it has a very pleasant because it is very soft to touch. Then it also has a melting of 30 to 35 degrees Celsius, which is also a prime acceptability to us, because we know that the body temperature of because human body temperature is 37.5 degrees Celsius. So, melting or using any sort of bases that melts around this range is actually a boon for us, because we do not have to provide any sort of extra conditions for melting, for providing biological action. So, this is one of the major disadvantages of using glycerogelatin base as well. However, And another important use of glycerol-gelatin base is that it is also used for vaginal suppositories. So, just a reminder that vaginal suppositories are known as pessaries. So, whenever we want to make suppositories that are often inserted into the vagina, so in that cases we will always go for glycerol-gelatin base, because the advantage of glycerol-gelatin base is that it is very much soft to touch, it is very soft in nature, then it is it melts at 30 to 35 degrees Celsius. So, that is also a very important factors. By considering all these situations, glycerol-gelatin base is always a yes by using is always a yes when we want to make vaginal suppositories, that is nothing but the pessaries. Then let us understand what are the advantages and disadvantages of glycerol-gelatin base. The various advantages, among that the very first advantage is that it melts at body temperature. So, definitely that is the advantage, because if it melts it is going to produce action. The second advantage is that it does not become rancid. Rancid is nothing but the foul smelling of oil or base. So, the major advantage of using glycerol-gelatin base is that it does not become rancid. Then another advantages of using glycerol-gelatin base is that it easily mixes with the body fluids. So, these are some of the advantages of glycerol-gelatin base. Now, the disadvantages, the very first thing, it is very difficult to prepare and handle. Then another thing, it is hygroscopic in nature, as gelatin is involved in it, then it definitely becomes hygroscopic in nature. So, it easily has a tendency to absorb any kind of moisture or water which is present around it, which is going to actually make the storage conditions very difficult for the manufacturers or the firms that are manufacturing suppositories. Then it has laxative in action. So, it is actually going to soften the process of passing stool. So, sometimes if a patient is having diarrhea, so in such cases it can aggravate this condition. So, we cannot go for bases that are actually glycerol-gelatin in nature. Then another disadvantage is that it is incompatible with tannic acid and ferric chloride. So, in such cases when the medication or medicament may involve tannic acid and ferric chloride, we cannot go for base that are known as glycerol-gelatin. Moving ahead, polyethylene glycols. Polyethylene glycols are also known as PEGs. PEGs are also a very much favorable choice while using suppositories bases. These are another type of water miscible bases or hydrophilic bases. Then they are commonly called as carbovaxes or polyglycols. They are available in solid, liquid or semi-solid state depending upon the molecular weight. Here I would like to add that if the molecular weight of the polyglycols, if it is below 1000, if it is below 1000, then it is it is present in liquid state, and if it is more than 1000, then the liquid state may get converted into wax state, solid state. So, depending upon the molecular weight of the PEGs, the size of the nature or the physical state of the PEGs may vary. Then they are chemically stable and physiologically inert substances. So, this is a prime concern for us, it is very much boon for us, because if it is an inert substance, it is definitely not going to interfere with the API, its insertion, its absorption, its release, its transportation. So, which is an important prime thing for us. Then they prevent of growth of bacteria or mold growth. Here when we were using glycerol-gelatin base, the hygroscopic nature or the presence of water content actually would facilitate the growth of molds or bacteria. However, when we are going for PEGs, that is polyethylene glycols, then the growth of bacteria does not happen, hygroscopic nature can be eliminated, or any sort of laxative action can also be eliminated when we are using PEGs as our suppository bases. Then moving ahead, advantages of PEG over any other water miscible bases. Definitely, as I discussed earlier, they are very much stable as compared to the another two types of hydrophilic bases. Then it is inert, so it is not going to interfere with any of the substances or any of the APIs. It is definitely non-irritant. So, continuous exposure can also be recommended to patients. Then it does not allow bacterial growth, so it can be preserved for various amount of time. Then it provides prolonged action, so compliance is oftenly increased. It does not stick to the mold, which is definitely a yes for us. If it stick to mold, aesthetic appearance will go down. Eventually suppositories formed tend to have a pleasant appearance. So, definitely we know that if anything has a pleasant appearance, it is going to impart acceptability by patients, and it is definitely if it has a pleasant appearance, the marketing strategy increases and everything goes on a larger scale. Moving ahead. So, that is all about the types of bases and the types of bases that are usually incorporated while making suppository. In this lecture, we saw about the hydrophilic bases and the oleogenous bases. In the next lecture, we are going to cover the third type of bases, that is emulsified bases. So, I hope this lecture might help you to understand the types of bases which is used to make suppositories. So, thank you so much.